printing. In this nugget, we discuss printing, and we start off with just a simple installation of a printer. And once that printer is installed, we'll look at the various properties for that printer, which will take us to the pooling and priority properties as well. The pooling will allow us to configure multiple print devices that print to the same logical printer, and that will allow us to get better throughput for our print jobs. And then we can also adjust the priority so that some users get higher priority in their jobs and get printed faster than others. We'll also take a look at job management so that if there's a job in the queue, you as the administrator can adjust its priority to kind of kick it up higher in the list and maybe print it out faster. We'll also take a look at location tracking, which is a great way, and especially larger corporations, to identify printers nearest your location so that you don't accidentally print to a printer 4,000 miles away. We'll take a look also at internet printing, which is a very handy way of using a browser to manage print jobs as well as to print. Well, in my opinion, printers are one of the necessary evils of computing. I don't really like printers, and you may not either, because they seem to be a constant source of frustration. They don't have enough memory, or they're out of toner, or they're out of paper, or there's a long line waiting for people to get their print jobs off of the printer, and you have to sort through other people's print jobs before you get yours, or you find that someone has already beat you to the printer and hastily just discarded your print job that you were waiting 20 minutes to be able to print out. So printers are just kind of a frustration at times. However, in this nugget, I'm going to show you some simple ways of installing, configuring, and managing your printers that will hopefully take a little bit of the inconvenience out of them. Let's go ahead and take a look first of all at how to install a printer, and for that we'll simply go to Start and then click on Printers and Faxes. Now, if the printer that I had turned on and attached to this server was a USB printer, for example, or a parallel port printer, either one of which would be a plug-and-play capable printer, then it would have started the plug-and-play manager. It would have gone ahead and asked for a driver if necessary, and if it already had the drivers in the driver.cab file on the local system here, then it would just install the drivers automatically, and we'd be pretty much done, and you'd see right here a printer already. Now, in order to install a printer, I'm going to double-click on Add Printer here, which will then launch a wizard for us to install the printer. Now, the printer I'm about to install is actually a network printer, and it's got a network card in it, and it's got an IP address of 10.10.10.104. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and click on Next through this, and since it is a network printer, I'm going to choose Local Printer. Huh? I thought you said it was a network printer. Well, I did, but there is a difference between the way these work. Look, here if I choose a network printer, that really means I'm connecting to another client or server's shared network printer that they've already installed and that they would already have back here in this interface and have a little hand under it and all that kind of stuff. That would be this kind of network printer where I'm connecting to their shared printer. In this case, yes, it's a network printer, but in the interface you have to choose local printer if you're just connecting to an IP address on that printer. And of course you will not choose to automatically detect using plug and play, because after all it's just an IP printer. Then we'll go ahead and click on Next here, at which point we specify which port we want to connect to. Now, I need an IP port, but I don't have one. So what I'll have to do instead here is to create a new port where I'll choose a standard TCP IP port and then Next, which starts an additional wizard to add a standard TCP IP printer port. Then I'll go ahead and click on Next and enter in the IP address of that printer port, and it's 10.10.10.104, and it automatically fills in for me also the port name. Then I'll go ahead and click on Next. And we see that we've defaulted here to the generic network card, but you see that there are also a variety of other manufacturers and things that you can choose from if necessary. Probably the most common one there would be the Hewlett-Packard Jet Direct type of network interface for your printers. So then we'll just click on Next, and we'll add a summary here. Just go ahead and click on Finish to install the printer. At that point, it then asks us what it is that we're installing, because you see, since plug and play doesn't work over IP that way, then what we would have to do is to manually choose which printer we're installing. Now, you could just do Have Disk. Also, on the Windows Update site, you can choose from printers. However, in our case, I actually have a Samsung printer installed, or available on the network here. So I'm going to go over here to Samsung and choose the appropriate model type. And here it is there, so let's go ahead and select it from this, go ahead and click on Next. And what this is going to do is it's going to go ahead and install a driver that Microsoft had, as you can see here, already installed previously from a previous installation. And this is going to be a signed driver from Microsoft instead of a driver that's not signed potentially from the manufacturer, and that'll be okay. Now, I can go ahead and use the kind of driver that's installed with driver.cab files on the local system here. However, you may lose out on some functionality that the vendor's drivers would have supplied for you. That'll just have to be something that you test out on your own. I'll just replace the existing driver in case, it's been updated or something like that. And then you give it a printer name. This is just a local printer name. This does not have any relevance to sharing, except that when you click on Next Now, it'll automatically give a share name based on the printer name that you've chosen. We'll go ahead and choose a different name. Microsoft sometimes recommends that you leave it a short name, but in most current Windows operating systems, you can use a longer name without any problem. So we'll just go ahead and call it the Samsung ML1650, and go ahead and click on Next. And here's where it gives me the warning that some MS-DOS workstations might not be able to find this printer by that name because it's over 8 characters. Well, if you're still working with DOS workstations, maybe it's time to consider an upgrade. So anyway, we'll just assume that we're not using DOS and click on Yes and Next. If you want to, you can specify a location. This has relevance when it comes to printer location and tracking in Active Directory. We'll talk about that in a little while, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that blank for now and click on Next. Of course, you can print a test page if you want to verify that you've installed it properly. Normally that's a good idea. I've done one in the past, so I know it's a good printer and a good print driver. So I'll just finish and allow the drivers to install. Now, once it's installed, we see that it's shared automatically, and it's also listed automatically in the directory, that is Active Directory, so that users can search for it if they like. Now, at this point, it's also probably important to define some terms. In the past, Microsoft has just called what you see right here the printer. You and I think of the printer as that 80-pound monstrosity that sits on a desktop someplace that's always out of paper. That's not what it is. Microsoft calls that the print device. And they call this software interface that includes all of the printer's properties and the drivers and all those kinds of things, they call that the printer, or sometimes now they're calling it the logical printer. So I think that makes a little bit more sense. Now let's take a look at the properties of this logical printer by just double-clicking on it, which opens up this print queue window, which shows that right now there are 0 documents in the queue. And one way to then look at the properties would be to go to Printer and then select Properties down here, or you could have also just right-clicked on the printer and chosen Properties here. Either way, when we get to the General tab, you see that we get some information that you can fill in, and I think that pretty well explains itself. Gives us some information about the printer. We can also choose the printing preferences, which specify how we normally want to be able to print, again, for orientation, page order, front to back, that kind of thing, as well as the paper quality, which tray we're going to use, whether it's automatically selected, all of that kind of stuff. Also, if you have advanced characteristics that you want to define for this printer, then you can click on the Advanced button, and you can specify more items such as, whether or not it's going to be 600 DPI or 300 DPI or whatever resolution you want for it, the quality, the kind of fonts that you're using, all that kind of stuff as well. Now, if you want to print a test page, which is often a good idea if you're having a troubleshoot a printer and you want to see if you can just get to it, you can go ahead and click on Print Test Page here, and that should then output a page for you. Note that I can also go to the Sharing tab where I've already shared the printer by default. Notice that, again, it is shared automatically. Anytime you add a printer through the Add Printer wizard that we just used, anytime you add that printer manually using that wizard, it automatically shares it. Anytime a printer is automatically installed using Plug and Play, you have to manually share it. So it's kind of backwards, but that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, anyway, we can just change our mind now if we want and not share the printer, or leave it shared and then also list it in the directory, which is also default behavior. That makes it searchable within Active Directory and has relevance for Active Directory sites and services and for printer location tracking, which we'll discuss later on. Now, if you have other clients that are going to be able to print to this printer, then you can choose additional drivers if necessary. Now, the drivers that are already included are already installed, and those are Windows 2000 or later printer drivers. But if you had 64-bit Windows, which would be this Itanium idea, or Windows 9 X drivers or NT4, then you can select the checkboxes for those additional printers and install those as well. Now also bear in mind that if I upgrade this printer driver so it's got a new improved version, then all of these versions, XP, Server 2003, whether 32-bit or 64-bit, NT4, and the one that you see currently highlighted, Windows 2000 or later here under their x86 architecture, all of those clients that use this print server where I'm currently seated now, where I've updated the driver, will automatically download the latest version of the driver, and there's zero maintenance on my part. However, if it's one of these down-level operating systems, then in order for them to get an updated driver, they have to be installed manually. Now, let's also go to this ports page. This could be really interesting when it comes down to things like troubleshooting printers or redirecting print jobs. For example, let's say I've got 18 print jobs in queue to this Samsung printer on the IP address of 10.10.10. So I can scroll down here a little bit. 10.10.10.104. Okay. Now, that print job, one of those print jobs jams really wicked bad, and I got to call service out. They won't be here till tomorrow to fix the printer. Well, what am I going to do with those other 18 print jobs in the queue? What you can do is, since they're actually on the physical server, the print server, they can be redirected to a different printer. And to do that, if I have another IP address to a different printer that is also a Samsung ML1650 series printer, then I could just check that box instead. Now, this print server will take anything that it had in its queue and redirect them to this IP address instead. Now also keep a couple other things in mind here. The print jobs are originally on this one. If there was one physically printing out on that printer, that one will be lost. The remaining ones that hadn't actually gone to the printer device itself will be able to go to this IP address now. Also bear in mind that this IP address port for this printer that I'm designating down here better have the same printer driver as the original one, because the clients will prepare the print job based on the printer driver for the Samsung ML1650. If this is a Hewlett-Packard, LaserJet 8100, then we're going to have some serious problems in printing, and you're probably going to get a bunch of gobbledygook because the print jobs are formatted completely differently. Now, sometimes you can also kind of cheat it halfway, and you'll have to kind of experiment with this in your own troubleshooting. But if this other TCP port was, for example, the Samsung ML1651, which uses the same print driver, then that would just be okay. Different printer, but uses the same driver. We'd be able to get by with it. Now let's take this a step further. Let's say that we do have two printers here that are both ML1650s, and after we had this one jam originally on us, we realized, you know what, one reason why it jammed is because it's so overburdened, the thing is printing constantly, and there's always 10 or 15 people in line waiting for their print jobs. So you can actually install a second physical print device, same exact printer device, another ML1650. But notice that I can only check one box or the other here. Well, what I could do is to enable printer pooling, and that would allow me then to have my printers or my users print out to a Samsung ML1650, and these two would be physically adjacent to one another on a desktop somewhere, a counter somewhere. If now with printer pooling selected, I can select both of these. Well, now what happens? What happens is this print server will identify whichever one is not busy, or whichever one is available first, and it will send a print job to this one. And then if this one's busy, it'll send the print job to this one. And the users will not know which printer it actually goes to, which physical print device. They're going to have to go to both of them and see if their print job is in the tray on one or the other. But at least that way we can cut down on the burden and improve our print performance for the users. Also, on the user side of things, I can do this halfway through. I can change horses in the middle of the stream. If this is what I originally started with, just this item, and I want to add additional printer, I don't have to do anything on the client side. They can continue to use their same print configuration, and just by adding this printer and checking this on the print server, now the user will go into the print room and they'll say, oh, hey, we now have two printers. And then they'll just be able to look at their print job on one printer or the other. Now on the Advanced tab, we see that we can always make printers available, and that's the default setting, but you can also make them only available during certain times of the day or night so that you can kind of hold off print jobs that may be very large and that are not very time sensitive, and they're just nightly reports maybe that people can pick up the next morning. Well, that way you can set this up so that it's only available during certain periods of time, and as soon as the clock ticks 12 or whatever time you specify here, jobs that users have started to print earlier in the day will go ahead and print as soon as it's available during this time period. And prior to that time, they'll just be held in the queue. And then you can also specify the priority. Now, here's where we come into play here. With this printer, maybe I want this to be a higher priority printer. Maybe this is the printer that I configure for, my high-level executives that want to get spoiled and always want what they want when they want it. So I'll increment this another level in terms of priority. We'll set this at 2 and click OK. And now here you see that in the background offline, I've gone ahead and configured another exact same printer. Now, these are actually connected to the same physical print device at 10.10.10.104. However, for my humble employees that don't get the high priority, I've got this low priority printer, and I'm the one that entered that in parentheses there. That doesn't happen automatically or anything. And for this one, I'll go to its properties and go to its advanced settings, and this one has a priority of 1. So then, any of the users that access this shared printer, and this is the one that they use, they're going to get a priority of 1. Any of my executives, I'm going to configure them with this shared printer. They get a priority of 2. Therefore, their print jobs will always come out ahead of all of the other lowly, humble people over here that print out to this printer. And of course we won't tell the users this, but we'll also configure the IT department to use this printer. Okay, so then we go back to its properties here, back to where we were on the Advanced tab, and we can see that we can also update the driver with a new version simply by clicking this button, and then we can also configure the spooling. Spooling will allow the print job to work faster. And what this does is it allows the print job to get started and be processed and be held on hard disk so that you can go ahead and print faster. And that way you can also get access back to your programs faster. You can also start printing after the last page is spooled, or you can start printing immediately, which is the default setting. And with this, the only reason why you'd go to start printing after the last page is spooled probably is you have some printing issues or some printing problems, and certain applications' print jobs are not going completely to the print spool and all the jobs not getting printed out. That way, if you select this option, then it will completely spool the print job before it starts printing, and you can kind of guarantee that it gets the whole job. And you can also print directly to the printer, which doesn't use any spooling of any kind. Now, many of the configuration options that are within this printer's properties have different settings that you could also configure, or conflicting settings that you could configure on a print job in the print dialog box. And if they are different between the two, between the actual individual print job and these properties, you can hold those mismatched documents. Those will be considered mismatched. And that might be the case if you want to guarantee that people always print to this printer with the exact same properties for some reason or the other. Then you can also print spooled documents first. And this relates to our priorities. See, even though we have a higher priority here, if the printer is configured to print spooled documents first, I might have one of my low priority users already printing a job, and if it's already spooling at the current time that one of these executives sends the job, it'll do the spooled job first, even though that user has a lower priority. You can also keep the printed documents, but that will significantly increase the amount of hard disk space that is in use on the print server. So just bear that in mind. If you do keep the printed documents, then they can also be restarted if something was wrong with the first time, or the printer jammed and the paper all got torn or something like that. You could then restart these kept jobs. You can also enable advanced printing features, which allows you to do things such as booklet printing, maybe two-sided printing, and all that kind of stuff. And then on the security tab, we see that administrators, print operators, and server operators all have pretty much full control over the printers and the print jobs. However, everyone has only the ability to print. Once they start printing, however, they then become the creator-owner of their own jobs, meaning that they can manage documents so that they can change properties of that print job as long as it already hasn't started to print out on the physical print device. Now then, to further demonstrate what you can do with print job priority, and to further show you what you can do with print job projects, I'm going ahead and pause this printer, which you do by right-clicking on it, and then simply selecting pause. I've already done that, so now the only other option would be to resume printing if I wanted. I'm just going to hold these jobs here because I don't want them to go to the physical printer. Now I'll just double-click on it to open them up, and this will allow you to see in the print queue exactly what's been going on with these print jobs. Here we had a help page that was printed by the trainer. It's one page in the size and the time and date it was submitted. And we have this quarterly report and the annual report that are also submitted. Well, what happens if whoever Phoenix User 03 is, they come to me and they say, hey, we got a critical report that's got to get out right now, and we've got the quarterly report already in the print queue. Our job must come first. Well, they're both at a priority of 1. Well, what I could do is I could right-click on this and I could just pause that job just to make sure that it doesn't get printed right now while this one is printing up at the top. And then I could go down here and right-click and then go to its properties. And as the administrator then, I can adjust the priority. It only has to be above 1 in order to get a higher priority. So I might just make that, 2 and OK. And now it has a higher priority. Then what happens is I can unpause this and resume it and everything. And then I'll just go ahead and allow the printing to continue, so I'll go back up here and deselect the pause printing checkbox to allow print jobs to complete again. Now what we see has happened is, yes, this print job was printing, but now the Phoenix User 03 print job, which had the higher priority than any of these others that were in the queue, went immediately to the printer, even ahead of the one that was on the trainer, and now the Phoenix User 02, as you can see there, was the final one. So we have the ability to adjust print job priority even while we have print jobs in the queue. Now let's just back up for a moment to get a big picture of things so that we can further identify how clients use these printers. First of all, this is the printer, or the logical printer is how Microsoft calls it now. And this is the drivers and all the properties for the physical print device that is right behind me right now. And that's that ML1650. Now, when the clients want to use this printer after I've already shared it, which is the default behavior for this kind of printer, then how do they install that printer themselves? Well, all they have to do is, and here I'm logged on as Phoenix User 02, has no special privileges of any kind. I'll just add the printer by clicking Add Printer within the Printers and Faxes window there. And then it starts the little wizard, and notice that I can't install a network printer. I can't install a locally attached printer because I don't have the authority to do that. But Joe user does have the capability to install a network printer, because if it's already shared by an administrator, then the assumption is that it must be safe if that administrator says it's all right. So then you click next, and again, you can just explicitly type in the name if you like, or you can find the printer in the directory if you like. Here I'll just go ahead and use Active Directory, and I'm not specifying any particular criteria. I'll just click Find Now, and we'll see that the results bring back to me these two printers. Well, I don't want the low priority one. I want the high priority one. So I'll just double click on that one to install it. Then, of course, it asks if you want to use that as the default printer or not. I'll just go ahead and next finish through all of this then. And now we see then that this printer is now installed. Now, that might have also brought up a question in your mind. You mean all my users can just pick and choose which printers they want to install? No, you don't have to do that. I mean, the only reason why this user was able to install this higher priority printer was because of the permissions on the printer itself. So that if I don't want just everybody to go into this printer, then I can go to the security of it, and instead of allowing everyone to print to it, I will just remove everyone here, or deselect the allow button, and then I could add a specific group, my executives security group, for example, and allow only them the print privileges. And at that point, then this user would not be able to see to install that printer. And then this now completes a three-part printer installation. We have the physical printer on the counter. We have the logical printer on the server, the print server itself, and that's what we've been working with for the most part up to this point. And then we have this printer, which is really just a connection to the server's logical printer, and you can see that as it says on DC Nugget 1. As a result, as well, the user over here, when he right-clicks and chooses properties here, notice that if he tries to go to some advanced properties or something like that and change the time that something is available and all that kind of stuff, this is all not available to him to change. That's because it's really administered over there on the print server by the administrator. Now, another thing I can do to make printers easier to locate for the users is to use something called location tracking. And this depends on Active Directory sites and services, the properties of this printer, as well as a group policy. Now, the way this works is that when users normally double-click on Add Printer, I'm on the Windows Server 2003 server now. It doesn't matter whether they're on XP or whatever they're doing. When they look for a network printer and click on Next, and then choose Find a Printer in this directory, you see that it shows the entire directory. Now, if they've got multiple domains that are a global organization with thousands of printers all the way around the globe, and they hit Find Now, first of all, it's going to take a long time to populate the whole list, and second of all, it's going to give them printers that are nowhere near where they are. They're thousands of miles away in Bangladesh and Singapore, the Philippines, London, France, all different kinds of places. And the user is going to get confused as to what they want, and chances are they're going to print a 1,000-page report over in Singapore somewhere. Anyway, so we got to figure out a way to clear that up. And let's go ahead and take a look. First of all, we'll cancel out of all of this, and then we'll go into Active Directory Sites and Services. Now, by default, you have a site there called Default First Site Name, and I'm just going to go ahead and rename this to Phoenix just to make it more intuitive. And then the second thing you do in order to make users be able to find the printers in Active Directory more easily is to use printer location tracking. And for that, you also need a subnet object. Now, I've only got one subnet in my scenarios, but that's okay. I'll just right-click here and choose New Subnet. And then what I want to do is to associate this subnet with the Phoenix site so that when someone comes up with an IP address that's associated with this subnet in Phoenix, then it'll automatically populate their Find Printer dialog box with any of the printers within this subnet. So we'll go ahead and choose New Subnet here. And we're on 10.10.10.0 in a Class C subnet address. And it's 255.255.255. We'll click OK after we associate it with Phoenix here. And now that subnet is associated with Phoenix. Now the next thing to do is to go to the properties of this subnet, and then we'll go up here to the Location tab and enter in a location. So we'll make it Phoenix as the site, and then /4F, and maybe that'll just be 4th floor, for example. This is somewhat arbitrary. You just come up with a naming convention and some easy-to-understand convention for both you and the users. And we'll just click OK here, and you can be as specific as you want. You can do, 4th floor, copy, room, whatever you want it to be. Anyway, I'll just leave it at 4th floor and press Enter to click OK there. Now, once we also have done that, we can also go back to the printers and faxes, go to the properties of this printer, and we need to enter in the same location for the location of this printer. Now that this matches that site, that subnet description of the Phoenix 4F, what we need to do finally is to go into Active Directory Users and Computers to access a group policy. Now once we've gotten here, we can go into whichever scope of management applies. I'll just do it for the whole domain, but typically you'll do this on an organizational unit or a domain if it's just a local domain. And I'll go to default domain policy and edit this. And then I'm going to go down to the administrative templates and printers. And this is where I'm really interested. What I want to do is to go to this item, and that is pre-populate printer search location text. And I've already enabled that and activated this policy. So once this is all configured then, all I have to do now when I go to Add Printer and click on Next here is that when I locate a network printer and search in the directory and click Next, notice that it automatically pre-populates the location field for me. So that even if I'm a user that has no clue about where all these printers are, that have thousands of printers in my organization, I've already pre-populated that as the administrator for the user. Now I click Find Now. It only gives me one printer, even though I actually have two printers actually here. And that's because this is the only one that's identified as being located in Phoenix on the 4th floor. Now another good way to be able to locate network printers is to simply go to a web browser. And going to the web browser, I can type in the name of the server, print server, followed by printers, like this. However, when I do that, it doesn't seem to be able to find any printers. Well, what's the deal here? The reason why is because although I have kind of snuck in an installation of IIS, or an Internet Information Server, on this server here, we have not installed an additional component that allows it to work with printers. So let's go back, because we went ahead of ourselves a little bit here. We'll talk about IIS in an upcoming nugget. But let's go back here to Control Panel and go to Add and Move Programs, where again you'll see that when I go to Add and Move Windows Components, I've kind of jumped ahead a little bit and installed components of IIS already, and that's found in the Application Server item here. Now I'll double click on that. Here we see that I've already installed IIS. I'll double click on that to go a layer deeper. Then we see that in this we have the common files and IIS installed and all the normal pieces of IIS that we would need for bare installation, but we don't have internet printing, which is what we've got to have in order to be able to use that HTTP web page. So I'll click OK and Next everything here. And then when this comes back up, I should then be able to go to my web browser to find the printers on that print server. And so now when I go to DC Nugget 1 Printers, it now opens up in a web browser for me, and then all I have to do is to click on a link for one of these printers. Now it's already been installed here, but if I didn't have it installed, all I would have to do is to click on a Connect button, or Connect link down here, and it would then download the drivers for me automatically as usual. And then the printer would be available to work with. Then it shows you the document list. If there's any in here, they will be available if you as the administrator want to remove one of them. There'll be a radio button for each document. You simply select it and choose to cancel it if you like. You can also look at the properties of the printer. So this gives you much of the same functionality that you would have in the actual printer properties and the logical printer properties. Now let me also point out some things relating to disk utilization and your printers. You see, if this printer gets slammed with all kinds of complex print jobs throughout the day and it's also a file server, wow. Now you got two things conflicting with one another. You got the file server function of the server competing with the spool functions of that server, and your hard disks are spinning all the time and churning, and you're really going to have unacceptable performance in all likelihood. So what you can do with this then is to redirect the spooled print jobs here to a different drive. And what I could do with that is to right-click on any empty space in here and right-click and choose Server Properties, or you can just choose from the File menu in Server Properties. And from here we want to go to the Advanced tab. The Advanced tab will allow us to choose the spool folder, and we can specify a different physical disk, a drive D or something like that. And that would then allow us to offload some of the burden from one hard drive, which is serving out normal user files, to a different drive that might be dedicated only to spooling. And another thing to note with that, by the way, is that that will redirect all the spooling for all of the printers. You can't do that on an individual printer-by-printer basis. Also be aware of the fact that if you get low on hard drive space and you're sending complex graphics jobs that are taking several megabytes each in the spooling process, you might wind up with some jobs that will print because you need much spool space, and you might have other jobs that will not print because they're using so much spool drive space that it requires so much. And you're going to get slower performance as well, so make sure that you do have adequate space for the spooling for the types of jobs that you plan to print. Another thing to keep in mind there is quotas, so that if on this drive where the spooling currently takes place, if I've also got user quotas set up for their hard disk utilization, and I've got each user set for only 100 megabytes for their quota, but some of the spooled print jobs are requiring 80 megabytes, and they've already got 30 megabytes of data on the drive, then they're going to exceed their quota, and any of the big print jobs will not print out. So keep aware of those kinds of things also. Now then, from a command line, you can also manage print jobs. For example, right now I'm going to the net print command, and I'm specifying this server and the share name for the printer. And all I'm doing right now is I want to list any print jobs that are in queue right now. Here we see that we've got a print job from the trainer, the job number, and it's kind of hard to line up with the columns and all that, but it's job number 9. And if I wanted to, for example, pause that print job, I could do so using the net print command. And I'm going to do that using this syntax, net print, the name of the server, job number 9, and then /hold, command complete successfully. I go back into this paused printer, and I see that that print job is also paused now. Then I go back into this, and if I want to release it, then I simply type in a similar syntax. And what you see right here, same command, only /release, and press enter. Now when I go back into the printer properties, I see that it is now ready to go as long as I release the printer itself as well. Now finally, if I want to just delete the print job, then I'll just do the similar syntax, only this time with a delete at the end, and now we'll go back into the print queue, and we'll see that that print job is now gone because I deleted it from the command line. Let me also point out that from the command line you can help yourself with some troubleshooting. A lot of times the spooled print jobs get kind of gummed up, if that's a real technical term there. They get kind of gummed up with various trash that comes along in bad print jobs that have occurred or in drivers that have not properly formatted a print job, and they can kind of hang up the printer. Well, what you can do is to start and stop the spooler, and you can do that either from the Services node by right-clicking my computer and choosing Manage, or by going to Administrative Tools and then going into Services down here. Either way, I've already gotten the computer management item open here, so I'll just go down here to Services and Applications and then Services. And then what we want to do is to look for the print spooler service. And here I've scrolled down to it. Here I'll simply right-click on it and restart that from this interface. Frankly, for my part, I like to do this from a command line easier because it's easier than clicking through all that stuff. I just do net stop spooler and do it just like that. It will also delete any jobs that are in the print spool, so be aware of that. And then when you're ready to go again, hopefully this will clear out whatever was gumming up the system. Net start spooler, and there you go. In this nugget, we took a look at printing, and we started off with just a basic installation of a printer and took you through the wizard on how to install the printer. You can also use plug and play, but remember that if you install using plug and play, then the printer is not shared automatically. But if you install manually using the wizard, then it automatically shares the printer. So just keep that kind of a reverse logic in mind there. Also, we took a look at the properties of a printer so that you can adjust those things like the spool properties, as well as how to do printer pooling, which allows you to use a single logical printer to print to multiple physical print devices, and then you can adjust the priority of your printers as well, so that some printers have higher priority than others, and then you can manage the jobs. When you're managing the jobs, that also allows you to adjust the priority, and then location tracking allows you to configure printers that are only local to your physical subnet, so that when you search for printers to use, you don't accidentally get a printer that's miles and miles away. You can also use internet printing to print across your intranet, and that might be useful if you want to do that instead of, for example, faxing something to a different office. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.